On a quiet Saturday morning, the sun rose gently over Lincoln Park, casting golden rays through the tall trees. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. Birds chirped cheerfully in the distance, adding to the peaceful atmosphere. Families were already out, enjoying the beauty of the day. Children laughed as they chased each other on the grass, while couples strolled hand in hand along the paved paths. It was one of those mornings that made people feel grateful for life. Jennifer Miller was among those who had come to the park to enjoy the calm. She was 6 months pregnant, her belly rounded with new life. Her husband, Jake, had encouraged her to take a walk while he ran some errands at the grocery store. "Get some fresh air," he had said with a smile before leaving. Jennifer agreed. She loved the park, especially in the early hours when it wasn't too crowded. It gave her time to think and relax, away from the busyness of daily life. Dressed in comfortable sneakers and a loose floral dress, Jennifer walked slowly along the winding path. One hand rested protectively on her stomach as she moved. Occasionally, she paused to admire the colorful flowers or watch squirrels darting between the trees. Everything seemed perfect, until the distant rumble of engines broke the serenity. At first, the sound was faint, almost like thunder rolling in from far away. But within moments, it grew louder, more aggressive. People nearby turned their heads, curious about the source of the noise. Then a group of bikers roared into view, tearing down the main road that cut through the park. Their motorcycles were loud, their engines revving aggressively as they sped past joggers, families, and dog walkers. Some pedestrians jumped out of the way, startled by how fast they were going. Leading the pack was Kyle Dawson, better known as Razor among his friends, or rather, followers. Razor was a tall, muscular man with tattoos covering both arms. His leather jacket bore patches that hinted at a rough lifestyle, and his dark sunglasses hid eyes that rarely showed emotion. Razor wasn't just any biker. He was infamous in certain circles for his reckless behavior and short temper. He lived for adrenaline, thrills, and chaos, and today he brought all three to the park. As the bikers zoomed past, mothers pulled their children closer, shielding them from the commotion. Elderly couples exchanged worried glances, muttering under their breath about how dangerous these men looked. Most people tried to ignore them, hoping they would pass quickly and leave the peace undisturbed. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. Razor noticed Jennifer almost immediately. She stood out against the backdrop of greenery, her bright dress catching his eye. At first, he didn't pay much attention. But then, as he swerved slightly to avoid a sharp turn, his motorcycle veered dangerously, close to her. Startled, Jennifer stumbled backward, her hands instinctively flying to her stomach. For a moment, she teetered on the edge of losing her balance but managed to steady herself just in time. Instead of stopping to check if she was okay, Razor laughed. The sound was harsh, mocking. To him, this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a fleeting distraction during an otherwise thrilling ride. Without slowing down, he continued leading his group further into the park, leaving behind a trail of dust and fear. But Jennifer wasn't so quick to shake off what had happened. Her heart pounded in her chest, partly from the shock and partly from anger. How could someone be so careless? She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. After all, there was no harm done, at least not yet. Still shaken, she decided to keep walking, hoping to put the incident behind her. What Jennifer didn't know was that Razor wasn't finished. A few minutes later, he slowed his bike down and signaled for his gang to do the same. They came to a stop near a picnic area, where Razor removed his helmet and scanned the surroundings. His gaze landed on Jennifer once again. This time, however, something about her demeanor annoyed him. Maybe it was the way she clutched her stomach protectively, or perhaps it was the fact that she hadn't run away screaming like others might have. Whatever it was, Razor felt irritated. "Hey!" he shouted loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Jennifer froze mid-step, unsure if he was talking to her. Slowly, she turned around to see Razor striding toward her, his boots crunching against the gravel path. His expression was hard, his jaw clenched tightly. Behind him, his gang remained mounted on their bikes, watching intently. "You got a problem?" Razor demanded, stopping just a few feet away from Jennifer. His tone was accusatory, as though she had done something wrong. Jennifer blinked in confusion. I'm sorry?" She stammered, unsure of how to respond. "You should be," Razor snapped. "You almost made me crash back there. Watch where you're walking next time." His words were sharp, cutting through the quiet morning like a knife. Jennifer opened her mouth to apologize again, but before she could say anything, Razor stepped even closer, invading her personal space. The tension in the air became palpable. Nearby, parkgoers began to notice the confrontation unfolding. Parents ushered their children away while others stopped what they were doing to watch nervously. No one dared to intervene, not yet. Razor's reputation preceded him, and most people knew better than to cross someone like him. For Jennifer, the situation felt surreal. Here she was, simply trying to enjoy a peaceful morning, and now she found herself face to face with a man who radiated hostility. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay composed. "I'm really sorry," she said softly, lowering her gaze. "I didn't mean to get in your way." Her apology only seemed to fuel Razor's anger. He sneered, shaking his head. "Sorry doesn't cut it," he growled. And then, without warning, he raised his fist and struck her squarely in the jaw. The impact sent Jennifer reeling. She cried out in pain, stumbling backward until she hit the ground. Tears welled up in her eyes as she cradled her face, unable to believe what had just happened. Around her, gasps and murmurs erupted from the crowd. Some people stepped forward hesitantly, unsure of whether to help or stay back. Others reached for their phones, ready to call the police. Amidst the chaos, one person remained eerily calm. Sitting on a nearby bench, unnoticed by everyone else, was Chuck Norris. The legendary martial artist and actor had been visiting the park to clear his mind after a long week of training young fighters at his dojo. When Razor punched Jennifer, Chuck's body tensed, his sharp eyes narrowing as he observed the scene unfold. He didn't move right away. Instead, he studied Razor carefully, assessing the situation. There was no doubt in Chuck's mind that this man needed to be stopped. But violence wasn't always the answer, or at least not immediately. Chuck waited patiently, giving Razor a chance to realize the gravity of his actions and walk away. But when Razor smirked triumphantly, clearly proud of himself, Chuck knew what had to be done. Slowly, deliberately, Chuck stood up. He adjusted his cowboy hat, straightening it atop his head. Then, with quiet determination, he began walking toward the scene. Each step he took seemed to command respect, drawing the attention of everyone around him. Razor noticed the movement and turned to face Chuck, his smirk fading slightly as he realized someone was challenging him. "What's it to you, old man?" Razor taunted, cracking his knuckles. His voice carried confidence, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Chuck didn't respond verbally. Instead, he locked eyes with Razor, his expression unreadable. The tension in the air thickened, promising that something big was about to happen, and indeed it was only the beginning. Razor's smirk grew wider as he sized up the man standing before him. To his eyes, Chuck Norris didn't look like much of a threat. He was older, dressed casually in jeans and a simple button-up shirt, with a cowboy hat perched neatly on his head. Razor couldn't imagine this unassuming figure posing any real danger. "You lost or something, Grandpa?" Razor sneered, taking a step closer. His tone dripped with mockery, as if daring Chuck to say something. Chuck remained silent, his calm demeanor unshaken. His hands hung loosely at his sides, but there was a quiet intensity in the way he carried himself. Nearby, people watched anxiously, unsure of what would happen next. Some whispered among themselves, speculating about who this mysterious man might be. Others held their breath, bracing for the worst. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Jennifer, still sitting on the ground, looked up at Chuck, through tear-filled eyes. She had no idea who he was, but she felt a strange sense of relief seeing him there. Something about his presence exuded strength and reassurance, even though he hadn't said a word yet. Jake, her husband, wasn't around to protect her, but somehow she felt safe knowing this man was nearby. Razor, however, didn't share Jennifer's sentiment. He took another step forward, closing the distance between himself and Chuck. "I asked you a question," he growled, his voice rising slightly. When Chuck still didn't respond, Razor's patience wore thin. "You deaf or just stupid?" he spat, his fists clenching tightly. That was when Chuck finally spoke. His voice was low and steady, carrying an authority that commanded attention. "You don't want to do this," he said simply, his words cutting through the noise like a knife. Razor blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected response. For a moment he hesitated, unsure of how to react. Then his arrogance kicked in again. "Oh yeah? And why's that?" Razor challenged, leaning in aggressively. His gang, watching from their bikes, cheered him on, egging him to teach this stranger a lesson. But Chuck didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his hat back slightly, revealing a pair of piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through Razor. "Because I'm not someone you want to mess with," Chuck replied, his tone calm but firm. There was no hint of bravado in his voice, just pure confidence. It was the kind of confidence that came from years of experience, from knowing exactly what he was capable of. Razor, however, misinterpreted it as weakness. "Big talk for an old guy." Razor snickered, flexing his muscles. "Let's see if you can back it up." With that, he swung his fist toward Chuck's face, aiming for a knockout blow. The crowd gasped, certain that the older man wouldn't stand a chance against Razor's brute strength. But Chuck moved faster than anyone could have anticipated. In the blink of an eye, he sidestepped Razor's punch, dodging it effortlessly. Before Razor could recover, Chuck countered with a swift kick to the side of his knee. The impact caused Razor to buckle, his legs giving out beneath him. He landed, hard on the ground, his sunglasses flying off his face and skittering across the pavement. For a moment, everything went silent. No one dared to breathe as they processed what had just happened. Razor lay sprawled on the ground, groaning in pain, while Chuck stood over him completely unfazed. The bikers who had been cheering moments earlier now exchanged nervous glances, unsure of whether to intervene or flee. Razor, humiliated and enraged, struggled to get back on his feet. "You're gonna pay for that," he shouted, his voice trembling with fury. He lunged at Chuck again, throwing wild punches in an attempt to regain control of the situation. But Chuck was always one step ahead. Each time Razor attacked, Chuck deflected his blows with ease, using precise movements that left Razor stumbling and off balance. The fight, if it could even be called that, was over almost as quickly as it began. Chuck delivered a final roundhouse kick to Razor's chest, sending him crashing backward onto the asphalt. This time Razor stayed down, clutching his ribs and wheezing for air. His tough guy act had crumbled entirely, replaced by sheer panic. Chuck knelt beside him, grabbing him firmly by the collar. Razor's eyes widened in fear as he stared into Chuck's face. "Listen carefully," Chuck said, his voice low and deliberate. "If I ever catch you hurting someone again, especially a pregnant woman, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Do you understand?" Razor nodded frantically, too terrified to speak. Chuck released him with a shove, leaving him sprawled on the ground like a discarded rag doll. Then, without another glance at the defeated biker, Chuck turned his attention to Jennifer. Kneeling beside her, Chuck offered her a hand. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked gently, his tone soft and reassuring. Jennifer hesitated for a moment before accepting his help. With his assistance, she slowly climbed to her feet, wincing slightly as she touched her jaw where Razor had struck her. Tears streamed down her face, but she managed a small nod. I think so," she stammered, her voice shaky. Thank you. Thank you so much." Her gratitude was heartfelt, and it showed in the way she clutched Chuck's arm for support. Chuck gave her a reassuring smile, patting her shoulder lightly. "It's going to be all right," he told her. "Just take a deep breath." He glanced around at the growing crowd, noticing several people holding their phones. "Someone should call the police," he added, addressing the bystanders. A few nodded and immediately dialed 911, eager to report the incident. Meanwhile, Razor's gang had begun to disperse. One by one, they revved their engines and sped away, unwilling to stick around and face the consequences of their leader's actions. Razor himself tried to crawl toward his motorcycle, but Chuck stopped him with a stern glare. "Don't even think about it," he warned. Razor froze, realizing there was no escape. As the minutes passed, the park transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Parents ushered their children away from the commotion, while others lingered to offer support to Jennifer. Some approached Chuck, thanking him profusely for stepping in when no one else had. Chuck accepted their gratitude graciously, though he remained humble throughout. "I was just doing what needed to be done," he insisted, brushing off the praise. Despite his modesty, it was clear to everyone present that Chuck was no ordinary man. His quick thinking and unmatched skill had saved the day, and possibly Jennifer's life. Jake arrived shortly after receiving a frantic phone call from a passerby who had witnessed the attack. He rushed to Jennifer's side, his face pale with worry. "Oh my God, are you okay?" he exclaimed, pulling her into a tight embrace. Jennifer nodded, burying her face in his chest as she sobbed quietly. Together they thanked Chuck once more, unable to express their gratitude fully. Chuck, sensing that the couple needed privacy, stepped back and allowed them to comfort each other. He watched silently as paramedics arrived to check on Jennifer, ensuring she was physically unharmed. Officers soon followed, handcuffing Razor and leading him away to face charges for assault. The park gradually returned to its usual tranquility, though whispers of the morning's events continued to circulate among visitors. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the trees, Chuck slipped away unnoticed. He didn't seek recognition or applause. He had acted out of a sense of duty, driven by a desire to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. For Jennifer and Jake, however, his intervention would never be forgotten. They resolved to name their unborn child Charles if it was a boy, a tribute to the man who had safeguarded their family. And as for Razor, he disappeared into the back seat of a police car, his reputation shattered and his ego bruised beyond repair. Rumors spread that he vowed never to return to Lincoln Park, haunted by the memory of the day he crossed paths with Chuck Norris. By the time the police arrived, the scene in Lincoln Park had settled into a tense calm. Officers quickly took charge, cordoning off the area and gathering statements from witnesses. Jennifer sat on a bench, wrapped in a blanket provided by one of the paramedics. Her jaw was sore, but she had declined further medical attention, insisting she was fine. Jake stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly, his eyes darting between his wife and the officers questioning Razor. Razor, meanwhile, sat on the curb with his hands cuffed behind his back. His head hung low, his usual bravado replaced by shame and anger. Every so often he would glance up at Chuck, who stood quietly nearby, observing the situation unfold. Razor's gaze was filled with resentment, but there was also a flicker of fear. He knew better than to try anything, not after what had just happened. Chuck didn't linger too long. After making sure Jennifer was safe and speaking briefly with the police, he prepared to leave. He adjusted his cowboy hat, nodded politely to the officers, and turned to walk away. As he passed by Jennifer and Jake, he paused for a moment. "Take care of yourselves," he said softly, offering them a small smile before continuing on his path. Jennifer watched him go, her heart swelling with gratitude. She wanted to say more, to thank him again or ask for his name, but the words caught in her throat. Jake, however, called out, "Wait, sir, we don't even know your name." Chuck stopped mid-step and glanced over his shoulder. For a brief moment, he considered staying anonymous, but something about their sincerity made him reconsider. "Just call me Chuck," he replied simply. Then, without another word, he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The couple stared after him, amazed by how humble and unassuming he seemed despite everything he had done. They exchanged a look, silently agreeing that they would never forget this man, or the kindness and courage he had shown them. As the day wore on, news of the incident spread like wildfire. People who had been at the park couldn't stop talking about what they had witnessed. Phones buzzed with texts and social media posts as details of the confrontation made their way online. By late afternoon, local news outlets had picked up the story, sending reporters to interview eyewitnesses and piece together what had happened. One woman, a mother of two who had been jogging when the fight broke out, described Chuck's actions in vivid detail. It was like watching a movie, she gushed to a reporter. This older man, just stepped in and took down that biker like it was nothing. I've never seen anything like it. Others echoed her sentiments, praising Chuck as a real-life hero. Speculation about his identity ran rampant. Some believed he was a retired cop or military veteran, while others joked that he might actually be Chuck Norris, the legendary martial artist and actor. The idea seemed far-fetched, but given the circumstances, no one could rule it out entirely. Memes and jokes about Chuck Norris began popping up online, adding a lighthearted twist to an otherwise serious event. For Jennifer and Jake, the aftermath of the attack brought mixed emotions. On one hand, they were relieved that Razor had been arrested and wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else anytime soon. On the other hand, the experience had left them shaken. Jennifer struggled to sleep that night, haunted by flashes of Razor's angry face and the sound of his fist connecting with her jaw. Jake did his best to comfort her, promising to stay by her side every step of the way. The next morning, they visited the police station to file a formal report. Officers assured them that Razor would face multiple charges, including assault and reckless endangerment. Given the severity of the incident and the fact that Jennifer was pregnant, the case was likely to receive significant attention from prosecutors. It was a small comfort, but it helped ease some of their fears. Back at home, Jennifer found herself reflecting on the events of the previous day. She thought about Chuck and how he had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, ready to protect her when no one else dared. She wondered if he realized just how much his actions meant to her and Jake, or if he saw it as nothing more than doing the right thing. Either way, she felt deeply grateful. Inspired by Chuck's bravery, Jennifer decided to take action. She reached out to a local community center and volunteered to help organize self-defense classes for women. If something like this can happen, to me in broad daylight, it can happen to anyone, she told the coordinator. I want to make sure other women feel empowered to protect themselves. Jake supported her decision wholeheartedly. Together they began attending meetings and brainstorming ideas for workshops. Their efforts quickly gained traction, drawing interest from neighbors and friends who had heard about their story. What started as a personal mission soon grew into a larger movement aimed at promoting safety and resilience within the community. Meanwhile, Razor sat in a holding cell, stewing in his own misery. The arrest had been humiliating enough, but knowing that his actions had sparked outrage only made things worse. Reporters hounded the police department for updates on his case, and his mugshot circulated widely online, earning him ridicule and scorn. Even members of his biker gang distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone who had become such a public embarrassment. Despite his tough exterior, Razor couldn't shake the memory of Chuck's steely gaze and calm demeanor. It wasn't just the physical beating that bothered him. It was the way Chuck had looked at him, as if seeing straight through his bluster to the coward beneath. Razor had always prided himself on being fearless, but now he wasn't so sure. For the first time in years, he felt truly afraid. Days turned into weeks, and life in Lincoln Park slowly returned to normal. Families resumed their weekend outings. Joggers pounded the trails and children played freely on the grass. Yet the memory of that fateful Saturday lingered, serving as both a reminder of danger and a testament to human kindness. Jennifer and Jake continued to prepare for the arrival of their baby, finding joy in the little moments despite the challenges they'd faced. They decorated the nursery together, chose names, and dreamed of the future. If the child was a boy, they planned to name him Charles, a tribute to the man who had changed their lives forever. As for Chuck, he disappeared from the spotlight as quickly as he had entered it. There were whispers that he had returned to his dojo, resuming his work training young fighters and sharing wisdom gained from decades of experience. Whether or not he followed the news coverage of the incident, no one knew. But those who had met him, even briefly, knew that his impact would last a lifetime. In the end, the story became more than just a tale of conflict and heroism. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are people willing to stand up for what is right. And sometimes those people come in unexpected forms, like a quiet man in a cowboy hat taking a morning stroll through the park. The weeks following the incident in Lincoln Park brought changes for everyone involved. Jennifer and Jake found themselves navigating a mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and lingering anxiety. While they were glad that Razor had been arrested and charged, the memory of his violent outburst still lingered in their minds. Jennifer often replayed the moment in her head, especially when she was alone. She couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if Chuck hadn't stepped in. Jake noticed how quiet Jennifer had become at times. He tried to reassure her, reminding her that they were safe now and that Razor would face justice. But deep down he too felt uneasy. The attack had shaken their sense of security, forcing them to see the world as a slightly darker place than before. Still, they refused to let fear control their lives. Instead, they focused on finding ways to turn the experience into something positive. Jennifer threw herself into organizing the self-defense classes she had proposed to the community center. With the help of local instructors and volunteers, they planned weekly sessions designed to teach women basic techniques for protecting themselves. The response from the community was overwhelming. Women of all ages signed up, eager to learn skills that could help them stay safe. Some attended because they wanted to feel more confident walking home at night, while others came simply to support Jennifer's cause. At the first session, Jennifer stood near the front of the room, addressing the group with a nervous smile. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady despite her jitters. "This isn't just about learning how to defend yourself. It's about feeling empowered and knowing that you have the strength to stand up for yourself if you ever need to." Her words resonated deeply with the participants, many of whom nodded in agreement. As the classes progressed, Jennifer grew more comfortable taking on a leadership role. She shared her own story openly, hoping it would inspire others to speak up about their experiences. One woman, a single mother named Lisa, approached Jennifer after a session to thank her. "I've always been scared of confrontations," Lisa admitted. "But hearing your story made me realize I can't let fear hold me back anymore." Jennifer hugged her warmly, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't expected. Helping others gave her a renewed sense of hope and reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. Jake, meanwhile, supported her every step of the way, attending the sessions whenever he could and cheering her on from the sidelines. Meanwhile, Razor sat in jail awaiting trial, his life spiraling further out of control. The charges against him were serious: assault, reckless endangerment, and harassment, and prosecutors were determined to make an example of him. News coverage of the case painted him as a dangerous thug, and public opinion turned sharply against him. His biker gang, once loyal to him, distanced themselves entirely, unwilling to be associated with someone who had become a pariah. Razor struggled to come to terms with his situation. For years, he had prided himself on being untouchable, someone who lived life on his own terms without consequences. Now, he was trapped in a tiny cell, surrounded by strangers who mocked him or ignored him altogether. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on him, though he tried to push those thoughts away. At night, lying awake on his thin mattress, he replayed the fight over and over in his mind. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image of Chuck standing over him, calm and unshaken. His court-appointed lawyer visited him regularly, urging him to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. "You're not going to win this," the lawyer warned during one meeting. "The evidence is stacked against you and the victim is pregnant. That's going to weigh heavily on the judge's decision." Razor clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. He didn't want to admit defeat, but he knew the lawyer was right. The odds were not in his favor. Despite his tough exterior, Razor began to question the choices that had led him here. Memories of his childhood surfaced. Growing up in a broken home, getting into trouble at school, and eventually finding solace among bikers who accepted him without judgment. They had taught him to value strength and aggression above all else, shaping him into the man he had become. But now, sitting in that cold, sterile cell, Razor wondered if he had taken the wrong path. Was there another way to live? Could he change, even at this point? Back in Lincoln Park, life continued as usual. Families returned to their routines, enjoying picnics and afternoon strolls along the trails. The park staff worked tirelessly to restore its peaceful atmosphere, planting new flowers and repairing benches damaged during the chaos. Slowly but surely, the scars of that day began to fade. Yet the memory of Chuck Norris lingered like a legend whispered among visitors. People debated whether the man who had intervened truly was the martial arts icon or simply someone bearing a striking resemblance. Local news outlets ran segments speculating about his identity, interviewing eyewitnesses and sharing footage of the altercation captured on bystanders' phones. Whatever the truth, Chuck's actions inspired countless discussions about bravery, heroism, and standing up for others. For Jennifer and Jake, the mystery of Chuck's identity remained unsolved. They never saw him again after that morning, and attempts to track him down proved fruitless. Still, they held on to the belief that he was out there somewhere, quietly continuing his work of helping others. In their hearts, they considered him a guardian angel, a figure who had appeared exactly when they needed him most. One evening, as Jennifer and Jake sat together on their porch watching the sunset, they talked about naming their unborn child. If it was a boy, Charles would indeed be his name. "It feels right," Jennifer said softly, resting a hand on her belly. "He saved us, Jake. Even if we never see him again, I want our son to carry a piece of that courage with him." Jake nodded, smiling gently. "Charles Miller," he said, testing the name aloud. "Sounds perfect." In another part of town, Chuck Norris went about his daily life as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He resumed teaching at his dojo, guiding young students through the principles of discipline, respect, and self-control. To those who trained under him, he was a mentor and role model, a man who embodied strength not just in body, but in character. Few suspected that the same man had recently taken down a notorious biker in broad daylight. Occasionally, Chuck thought about Jennifer and Jake, wondering how they were doing. He hoped the incident hadn't left lasting scars on their family. Though he didn't seek recognition for his actions, he took comfort in knowing he had made a difference, even if only for a moment. As days turned into months, the story of the biker, the pregnant woman, and the mysterious hero became a cherished tale passed down in Lincoln Park. Parents told it to their children as a reminder that kindness and courage could overcome even the darkest moments. And while the details might change over time, the essence of the story remained the same. Sometimes, when the world seems at its worst, a true hero steps forward to remind us of the good that still exists. As the months passed, the community of Lincoln Park continued to heal and grow stronger. Jennifer's self-defense classes became a cornerstone of the neighborhood, drawing more participants each week. What had started as a small initiative quickly blossomed into something much larger. A movement that brought people together and fostered a sense of unity. Women who attended the sessions formed bonds with one another, sharing stories, advice, and encouragement. It wasn't just about learning how to throw a punch or block an attack. It was about building confidence and resilience. Jennifer found joy in seeing the transformation in her students. Many of them arrived at their first class nervous and unsure, but over time they grew bolder and more self-assured. One woman, Maria, stood out in particular. She was in her late 40s, shy and reserved, with a history of abusive relationships. At first, she hesitated to participate, often standing at the back of the group and avoiding eye contact. But Jennifer noticed her determination and took extra time to encourage her. "Maria, you're doing great," Jennifer said during one session, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. "Watch this. She has perfect form." The room erupted in applause, and Maria blushed, smiling for the first time in weeks. From that moment on, she began to open up, making friends, and even volunteering to help organize future events. Her progress inspired others, proving that change was possible no matter where you started. Jake, too, played a role in the growing movement. While he didn't teach self-defense techniques, he helped behind the scenes, handling logistics and spreading the word through social media. Together, He and Jennifer created flyers, posted updates online, and reached out to local businesses for support. Their efforts paid off when a nearby gym offered to sponsor the program, providing free space for classes and donating equipment like mats and punching bags. The couple's dedication didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors often stopped them on the street to express their gratitude. "You two are amazing," one elderly woman said, patting Jennifer's shoulder. "What you're doing is so important." Others joined in, offering to volunteer or contribute in any way they could. The sense of camaraderie that emerged from the classes spilled over into everyday life, strengthening the fabric of the community. Razor's trial finally arrived, months after his arrest. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as spectators filled the benches, eager to witness the outcome. Reporters lined the walls, scribbling notes and snapping photos. Razor sat slumped in his chair, his once arrogant demeanor replaced by a defeated expression. His lawyer argued that he had acted impulsively and hadn't intended to cause serious harm, but the evidence told a different story. Jennifer and Jake were called to testify, recounting the events of that fateful morning in vivid detail. Jennifer's voice trembled slightly as she described the moment Razor punched her, but she remained composed, determined to tell her truth. When asked how the incident had affected her, she paused, gathering her thoughts before answering. "It made me realize how vulnerable we can feel, even in places where we should be safe," she said. "But it also showed me that there are good people willing to step in and protect us." The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning, with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Razor was sentenced to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3, if he demonstrated good behavior. As the judge read the sentence aloud, Razor lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's gaze. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. After the trial, Jennifer and Jake left the courthouse hand in hand, relief washing over them. They knew justice had been served, but they also understood that punishment alone wouldn't fix everything. True change would require effort, not just from Razor, but from society as a whole. Still, they allowed themselves a moment of quiet celebration, knowing they had done their part. In the months leading up to the birth of their child, Jennifer and Jake focused on preparing for the future. They finished decorating the nursery, choosing soft blues and greens for the walls and filling the shelves with books and toys. Every item they picked carried meaning, from the handmade quilt stitched by Jennifer's grandmother to the stuffed bear Jake had bought during their first ultrasound appointment. They dreamed of the moments ahead, the late-night feedings, the first steps, the laughter, and vowed to raise their child with love, kindness, and courage. When the baby arrived, a healthy boy named Charles, their world shifted in ways they hadn't imagined. Holding their son for the first time, they felt an overwhelming mix of awe and responsibility. "Welcome to the family, little hero," Jake whispered, brushing a finger against Charles's tiny hand. Jennifer smiled, tears streaming down her face as she thought about the man whose name they had chosen to honor. Though Chuck Norris remained a mystery, his presence lingered in their hearts. Jennifer often told Charles stories about the brave stranger who had saved them, weaving tales of strength and compassion into bedtime routines. She hoped these stories would inspire him to stand up for what was right, just as Chuck had done. Meanwhile, Chuck continued living his quiet life, unaware of the impact he had made. He spent his days teaching martial arts, mentoring young fighters, and spending time outdoors. Occasionally, he visited parks like Lincoln, finding peace in nature and enjoying the simplicity of a morning walk. To those who knew him, he was simply a kind and humble man who believed in helping others whenever he could. One day, while browsing the news online, Chuck stumbled across an article about Jennifer and Jake's self-defense program. The headline read, "Couple turns tragedy into triumph, inspiring change in Lincoln Park." Intrigued, he clicked on the link and read the full story. As he scrolled through the photos, he recognized Jennifer immediately, her bright smile shining through the screen. A wave of pride washed over him, knowing that his actions had sparked something so meaningful. Chuck didn't reach out or reveal himself. Instead, he closed his laptop, leaned back in his chair, and smiled to himself. He had always believed that true heroes weren't defined by fame or recognition, but by the lives they touched and the positive changes they inspired. In that moment, he felt certain that he had done exactly what he was meant to do. Years later, Charles grew into a curious and compassionate child, embodying the values his parents instilled in him. He loved hearing stories about the man whose name he carried, imagining adventures filled with bravery and heroism. On his 8th birthday, Jennifer surprised him with a framed photo of Chuck Norris, autographed with a simple message. To Charles, stay strong and kind, Chuck Norris. How did you get this? Charles asked, wide-eyed with wonder. Jennifer grinned, ruffling his hair. Let's just say I have my ways, she replied cryptically. In reality, she had reached out to Chuck's team, explaining their story and asking for a signed photo. To her surprise, they agreed, sending the cherished keepsake along with a note thanking her for sharing Chuck's legacy. That night, as Charles drifted off to sleep, he hugged the photo tightly, feeling a connection to the man who had unknowingly shaped his family's life. Across town, Chuck Norris sat on his porch gazing at the stars and reflecting on the countless lives intertwined by acts of kindness, both big and small. As Charles grew older, the values his parents had worked so hard to instill in him began to shine through. He was a thoughtful child, always eager to lend a hand or offer words of encouragement to those around him. Whether it was helping a classmate pick up dropped books or standing up for someone being teased on the playground, Charles carried himself with a quiet confidence that made others feel safe and supported. Jennifer and Jake often marveled at how much their son reminded them of the man whose name he bore. Though they never pushed Charles to live up to anyone else's legacy, they couldn't help but notice the parallels. Like Chuck Norris, Charles had a natural ability to diffuse tension and bring people together. His teachers praised him for his kindness and leadership, and his friends admired him for his fairness and humor. By the time Charles reached middle school, he had developed a passion for martial arts, a decision inspired by the stories Jennifer told him about Chuck. At first, she hesitated, worried that introducing him to fighting might stir up memories of the day Razor attacked her. But Jake reassured her, pointing out that martial arts weren't just about combat. They were about discipline, respect, and self-control. Together, they enrolled Charles in a local dojo, hoping it would help him channel his energy and build character. From the moment he stepped onto the mat, Charles felt at home. The instructors noticed his enthusiasm and dedication, often staying late to work with him on techniques and forms. Over time, he became one of the top students in his class, earning belts and trophies that filled a shelf in their living room. Yet what impressed Jennifer and Jake most wasn't his skill, it was the way he treated others. Even during sparring matches, Charles prioritized respect over winning, bowing deeply to his opponents and shaking hands after every bout. Years passed, and Lincoln Park remained a vibrant part of the community. Jennifer's self-defense program continued to thrive, expanding to include workshops for men and children as well. What had once been a small effort born out of tragedy had evolved into a cornerstone of local life, empowering hundreds of people to take charge of their safety and well-being. Families gathered regularly for picnics and festivals, celebrating the bonds they had formed through shared experiences. One summer evening, Jennifer stood at the edge of the park, watching as Charles practiced kicks under the watchful eye of his instructor. Nearby, Jake played catch with a group of neighborhood kids, laughing as they cheered each other on. It was a scene filled with joy and connection, a testament to how far they had come since that fateful morning years ago. A familiar voice broke through her thoughts. "You've done an incredible job here." Jennifer turned to see Chuck Norris, standing behind her, his cowboy hat tilted slightly forward. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then, reality set in, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Chuck," she whispered, stepping forward to hug him, "I can't believe it's really you." Chuck smiled warmly, returning the embrace. "I read about everything you've accomplished," he said. "I wanted to see it for myself, and maybe meet the young man who shares my name." Jennifer nodded, wiping her tears. "Charles," she called, waving him over. Charles jogged toward them, curious about the stranger speaking with his mother. When he arrived, Jennifer placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is Chuck Norris," she said simply. Charles's jaw dropped. "The real Chuck Norris?" he asked, wide-eyed. "The one and only," Chuck replied with a chuckle. "Nice to meet you, Charles." For several minutes, Charles peppered Chuck with questions, asking about his training, his movies, and his philosophy on life. Chuck answered patiently, sharing stories and offering advice that left Charles starstruck. By the end of their conversation, Charles felt like he had gained not just a hero but a mentor. Before leaving, Chuck pulled Jennifer and Jake aside. "Thank you for letting me be a part of your story," he said sincerely. "And thank you for raising such an amazing boy. The world needs more people like him and like you two." Jennifer and Jake exchanged emotional glances, overwhelmed by his words. They walked Chuck to the edge of the park where he paused to look back at the bustling scene. "It's a beautiful place," he remarked, "full of good people doing good things." As the years went by, Charles continued to grow into the person his parents hoped he would become. He excelled in school, earned scholarships for college, and eventually founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to teaching self-defense and conflict resolution to underserved communities. His work took him across the country, allowing him to spread the lessons he had learned from both his parents and Chuck Norris. Jennifer and Jake watched proudly as their son made a difference in the lives of countless individuals. They knew that none of it would have been possible without the chain of events that had begun on that chaotic morning in Lincoln Park. The attack, though terrifying, had sparked something extraordinary, a ripple effect of courage, compassion, and change. Razor, meanwhile, served his sentence and emerged from prison a changed man. Prison counselors worked tirelessly to help him confront the anger and insecurities that had fueled his violent behavior. Through therapy and education programs, he slowly began to rebuild his life, taking responsibility for his actions and vowing to make amends. Though he never returned to Lincoln Park, he found solace in volunteering at shelters and mentoring at-risk youth, determined to break the cycle of violence that had shaped his past. Decades later, when Charles was grown and had children of his own, he brought them to Lincoln Park to share its history. Standing beneath the same trees where Jennifer had walked all those years ago, he told them the story of a brave woman, a mysterious hero, and a lesson about standing up for what is right. As he spoke, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the events that had unfolded, but for the people who had shaped his journey. In the distance, a figure sat on a bench, watching quietly. It was Chuck Norris, now older but still radiating strength and wisdom. He tipped his hat to Charles, then rose to leave, disappearing into the crowd as silently as he had arrived. Though few noticed him, his presence lingered, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that lasted a lifetime. And so, the story came full circle, weaving together threads of courage, resilience, and hope. In Lincoln Park, and in the hearts of those who called it home, the memory of that day lived on, inspiring generations to come.